So today we are going to tell our story about a basically pain-free supernatural birth of little Eden here. So I guess I'll start with pregnancy and just trying to prepare for, having like a pain-free birth, because I had three traumatic births before. So to me, that would be a complete miracle to have a birth that had no pain and went smoothly and there was no trauma involved. And so I'm going to tell that story, and I'll talk about some of my previous births so that you can kind of, compare those as well. So I came across supernatural childbirth and, what it means to have a pain-free childbirth through a book. And the book was, I think it's called Pain-Free Childbirth, Every Woman's Blessing in Jesus by Nissette Andrews. I'm pretty sure I'll link that below. But so I started reading that book and I thought, why not just read it? Let's just see. I was very skeptical, like, can anyone really have a pain-free birth, or is it just basically something that happens for some people but not for others? So he's here. This is my husband, Canyon, to just kind of, talk about things that maybe I didn't even notice was happening in the moment, because I was really in the moment during birth. But so I was reading this book and studying it, and I thought, if this woman can have four, I think, pain-free births through Jesus, through God's abilities, not her own abilities, but through God's strength, then why can't I? And so I started studying that. And you have to work through a lot in your mindset, especially when almost everyone in the world talks about how terrible childbirth is, how painful childbirth is, and just tells you all the horror stories. And I was one of those, because I had the horror stories too, and I never imagined that this could happen. So studying that book, I would write everything down on note cards and just study it every day. When I would feel doubt of, like, could I really do this? Do I really want to do this? Should I just go to the hospital and get an epidural and, do what I felt like would be easier? And so I would have to renew my mind constantly every day and basically adapt this new mindset around birth, that this could happen and that it wasn't my abilities, it was God's abilities, and learning how to completely surrender to God and trust God, because I realized throughout the process that there's a lot of things in my life, not just like with pregnancy and childbirth, that I hadn't fully surrendered to God and was not trusting Him with. And so that can be a hard thing to do when you've never really done that with anything else. There are a lot of things that has happened in my life, like child loss and stuff, where I had to fully surrender and trust God. So I had some experience with that. But outside of that, there were a lot of things. And so that book was helpful, not with just like pregnancy and childbirth, but also just bringing that to the light and bringing that from a different perspective and adapting a new perspective of what it means to surrender and trust God. And so, it was getting closer to her due date, which was July 20th. And I would feel a lot of contractions on and off for like 2 weeks before she was born. And so, if that's happened to you, you probably understand that can get like discouraging. You're just like, when is it going to happen? It just seems like it's never going to actually happen. And how am I going to know that I'm actually in labor if it's pain-free? Like, I had that little worry of like, am I in labor right now? And I just don't know, because I would time my contractions and have them pretty consistently. But I was like, well, what if I'm in labor right now and just don't know? And so it was always kind of like, I could have allowed that to cause anxiety and fear if I didn't prepare to fight against anxiety and fear, like through the, putting on the armor of God and things like that, so that you can fight back against the fear when it does come. And so, do you have anything to say about before the birth? Like,
it was some studying. It was a lot of studying the books, and there was another book that you read as well.
Mm-hmm.
And so just learning and going through that, and seeing what other women had accomplished through God and what they've been given.
And He gave me a lot of time to prepare too. So like, He was always allowing me to have like alone time without our other children and stuff, to be able to actually prepare. And so he like fully supported me in that, and he didn't ever make, he didn't ever downplay anything with me. And so did you fully believe that that could happen? Like, because I showed him some of the book. He didn't read the book or anything, because he just kind of was like, okay, if you're gonna believe for that, then I'm gonna believe for that too. And that was really what I got from him, as far as him like, supporting me in that. Oh, it's okay. So I'm gonna get her situated and our other kids who almost just came in. So we're gonna get them situated. I'll pause the video and then start back up. Okay, we're back. So I think we're just to the point where I was asking you, was there anything that, like when I approached you with this idea of the pain-free birth, were you like skeptical, or how did you actually feel, or did you just kind of go with it? I can't remember.
I mean, at first, it's kind of skeptical, of course, but then it's also the matter of, you think of animals, like we had done the husband birth coaching last time or something like that.
Yeah.
And so whenever you think back to that, animals, they do it without anybody, and it doesn't seem like they're in pain or anything like that. So it's like there must be a way. And then you read and hear the stories of other ladies who've gone through these techniques and trainings, and they have pain-free births, or somewhat pain-free births, I guess you could say semi-pain-free births, or totally pain-free births. And you're like, well,
So it wasn't too hard for you to be like, okay, we'll just go with that.
Well, you have to think that we believe in an all-powerful God. He can do anything, and so why couldn't he do this?
Yeah. So that was kind of the idea, and just trying to get prepared. And you can never really prepare for that, because you don't know what's going to happen. It's totally unknown still, no matter how much you prepare. So
and you don't know when it's going to happen.
Yeah. So there are a lot of things that you just don't know. And we were preparing for a home birth. So God kind of, orchestrated that for us as well, because we moved, I guess, like 2 months before her due date. And so we were trying to find, a midwife within just 2 months to come to, and we live in our RV full time. So that adds another layer of like, this seems impossible that it could ever happen. That I could, what I wanted was a home birth in our RV, and it to be a, birth in the tub, things like that. So there was these little things that I wanted and was just believing for. And so
what's some things that you wanted?
Well, the want was the midwife. I wanted to find a midwife, because otherwise I couldn't have her at home. And it seemed like I wasn't going to find one, because I started calling, trying to find one. We're in an area that it's not easy to find a midwife anyways. And so it was difficult to find. And so I had those moments of doubt, like, is this really going to happen for me? Am I really going to get the things I want, like the home birth and all of that, and pain-free birth, and some other little things that I was praying for, I guess, like the details would have been, even the smallest detail. So like, I didn't want to deal with
the midwives sitting there staring at you for hours.
Well, yeah, those little things. I'll talk more about that when I talk about the actual birth. But like, for example, just like, I knew I wanted to have a water birth, but I didn't want to have like a bowel movement in the water. Okay, so all of us who have babies, we know that like, we're dreading having a bowel movement during birth. And so I was even praying for those little details, because why not pray for that? If you know God's listening to you, you know that he wants to give you the desires of your heart, as long as it's in his will. And so why not pray for that? So I was praying for those little details too. Some other things would have been like no tearing. In my other births, I had terrible tearing during the birth, and so I knew that was something I didn't want to experience again. I also had hemorrhaging after birth with all my other kids, and so I got to the point where I almost had to have a blood transfusion and things like that. So I knew that would not be a good situation to be in at home, in home birth. So I was praying for those things as well every single day. I wrote it in my prayer journal every day, and was just diligent with praying for exactly what I wanted, because why not pray for exactly what you want? And that's just a way to be prepared. And if it didn't happen, I also had the mindset of, okay, if it doesn't happen, it's not God's will, and I'm not going to let that up, just destroy everything else and ruin everything else if I don't get exactly what I wanted. So let's get to the good part where I'm actually in labor. So I was still worried, what if I can't tell if I'm in labor, because I knew I was wanting this pain-free birth, and I really believed that God was going to give it to me. So it's like, how God am I going to know I'm in labor? So that was a big question. Getting closer to time, when I got nervous, I was asking God, please give me discernment for this, because I don't know what to expect at all. And my labors in the past hadn't really been slow, so I knew it could go fast, and I wanted the midwives to be here, and all these little details that you can get caught up in your mind and be fearful of, even though in the long term, like, they don't really matter that much. But so the day that I went into labor, he was at work, which is what I prayed he wouldn't be at work, but he was. So that was one thing I had to work through, and it wasn't a big deal. But
well, that was towards the end.
Yeah, he was about
only
to get
had a couple
off work.
hours left.
Yeah. So I wasn't in like really labor, but I noticed. So the way that I was able to notice was timing contractions. So I didn't want to time contractions all the time, become like obsessed with that, because also that to me didn't feel like having, like the faith that God was going to work it all out if I was just obsessed with timing all the time. And
it can be stressful.
Yeah, it can discourage you.
If they start to separate, you're like, oh man.
Yeah, it gets
frustrating. It can stop labor.
Yeah, so then you get all frustrated and all that. So another quick thing that happened to me was from time to time, I get migraine attacks, really bad, terrible migraines. And so with my previous child, I got a lot of migraines towards the end of pregnancy, which kept postponing labor. And so she was born a week after her due date because of that. And I was just having migraines back to back to back because of the hormones. So with her, I was really fearful, like the week or two before she was born, of getting these migraine attacks and it pushing off labor, or getting one during labor. And so that was another thing that I was really praying for, like, God, please protect me from these migraines. So a week before she was born, I got a terrible migraine. I thought I was in labor. I felt like I was in labor, and then I got this migraine. And so whenever that happens, everything just stops. My contractions completely stop when I get a migraine, and then I'm in terrible pain, and it's just a horrible time. So that was really discouraging in the moment, because I was like, God, why? Why would you let me get this migraine? I've been asking you for protection from migraines. Like, why is this happening to me? So I could have allowed that to doubt and make me feel like, because I did feel pain. I was praying during that migraine, God, please don't let me feel any pain during this migraine. If I can pray for a pain-free birth, why can't I have a pain-free migraine right now? And it just wasn't working. As far as I could see, I don't know what, God's like supernatural perspective of that was. But for me, I know that it was a little bit discouraging, because here I was getting attacked by this migraine and pain 1 week before I was supposed to have this pain-free birth. So you could see how that would, get into your mind. So if you're praying for this and you experience pain or anything before, you have to
remember.
Yeah, you have to remember and, talk yourself into still trusting God. Because that could really get into your mind about, well, if I can't even pray a migraine away, how am I going to pray, pain away in birth? So that crossed my mind, and I had to really work through that really hard in, my mindset. So if you experience any pain or anything during pregnancy, that doesn't mean that you're not going to have a pain-free birth, because God can still do it for you, and it's through His abilities, not yours. And so, the day that I was in labor, I was, I still had that little bit of fear of like, what if I get a migraine and this, so I was trying to fight those fears. But I started timing contractions, and that's how I knew I was in labor. And I really still didn't know. And so I was so nervous for my midwife to come, because I didn't want her to come here in our little camper and be sitting here for hours. And it's just like, oh, I'm not actually in labor. And she had to drive like 2 hours to get here. And
she had 2 apprentices that were coming.
Yeah, 2 other people.
So 3 people total would be coming.
Yeah. So he was at work. I was texting him like my contractions are 5 minutes apart. I felt no pain whatsoever, but I could tell I was having contractions just because of the pressure. And so I was like, it's different than it had been. I had timed them some, and they would be like 7 minutes apart for about 40 to 50 seconds or so, and they would be continuous, and they would go on and on and on, but nothing ever came of it, and it didn't ever get closer. So I noticed these were getting down to like 5 minutes, and then they were getting down to 4 minutes, and they just slowly over a few hours started to get closer together. And I was like, I think I am in labor. You probably should come home. We need to prepare. You know, I don't even know if we ate dinner yet and stuff. And we knew that we were going to have the tub put up in our camper. So like, we just needed to prepare a little bit. So he came home like 1 hour early from work. And what were you thinking? Did you think I was actually in labor? Were you like, is she actually in labor?
At first I was kind of like, okay, we'll see where this goes.
Yeah.
You know, because we had the labor scare before, and it was like, okay, let's just see how it plays out. You know, it was the day after the due date. No, it was the due date. It was the due date.
Yeah, this was on the due date.
So, and it was kind of like, okay, let's see how it rolls. And that was really it. And then as the night progressed, it was kind of like, okay, yep, we're definitely in labor. We just don't know when.
Yeah, it was still so unknown. No pain.
Yeah, we don't know when as most people call it, you know, the real labor
like
starts.
Active labor.
Yeah.
So I was technically in early labor, I guess you would call it. And so with she's awake. So anyways, with timing contractions, I was like, okay, I think I'm gonna let the midwife know, and then I'll just let her know when to come. But
in a way, kind of let her make
come.
that judgment call too.
I just knew I wanted it to be super quiet, and I didn't want anyone in the room really, except for him. And I did call my mom to come to help with the other kids, just in case we have 2 more kids, just in case they, you know, were like distracting or anything. And so my older daughter, who was 8, she wanted to be there, so she was planning to be there. But we also had have a 1.5-year-old, and so I knew that she could be distracting. So my mom was on the way around this time, and this was probably around 8 p.m., 9 p.m. at night. Yeah, about 8 p.m. Yeah. And so I still wasn't feeling any pain. It was just he's timing the contractions. So that's how I knew that I think I'm in labor, but it was still just a weird feeling to not really know. Like there was no signs other than timing the contractions. That was it. I really can't remember any signs at all, except for
you
just
had some pain in your.
Every once in a while.
You had a sensation of pain in your back, didn't you?
Oh yeah, I did have some pain in my back that I usually didn't have, but it wasn't like contraction pain. So it wasn't like I was experiencing contractions in my back like some people do during labor, but it was just like, okay, this is a little bit different. I wonder if this is it. So time went on. My mom got here. We got the other kids were asleep. So it was around 11 or midnight. It was midnight. So at midnight, I was still timing these contractions. I told my midwife through text, hey, I'm going to go take a nap. And I had been praying, like, God, please give me discernment on what to do. What?
Well, I was just thinking that also, so midnight we're going to take a nap, but also we had put the tub in our living room, filled it up with water with 5-gallon buckets.
Yeah.
And put this heating element in it. And it had been a while. And the water still was not warm whenever we took this nap. So go ahead.
Is she still hungry? So we were preparing for the birth by getting
the pool ready.
The birth pool ready. And our only mechanism for that was like the 5-gallon bucket, putting water in, because in our camper we have it's like a 6-gallon hot water heater. So we couldn't fill up the tub with our hot water. So we
and the hoses didn't reach to get to it either.
Yeah. So just in case you need to know this little tip. We had to order a thing off of Amazon, and I can link it below because I don't know what it's called or anything, but it is basically for cattle. So it's this little
it's a heating element that in winter they put it into water troughs to keep the water from freezing.
Yeah. So
that's what it is.
If you type in Amazon, I think I typed in like water. I think I literally just typed in water heater for cattle or something. So anyways, I don't want to take too much time talking about that.
Yeah.
But it was really slow. So filling up this birth pool, which wasn't really that big anyway, but was taking time. So I was trying not to get nervous about that. I was like, oh.
Yeah, so we decided to take a nap.
Yeah, am I really going to have hot water? So that was another thing. You just have to have that strong mindset of, I don't care what is happening. I am going to have this, nothing is going to get in my way. All this opposition that might try to come, like the water not warming up, don't know if I'm going to have a birth pool to have the baby in. All of that, those little things, you have to just be like, I don't care. If that, I'm letting that go. That's not the most important thing here. If that happens, then I can still have a pain-free birth on the bed. It'll be okay. So, I let all that go and then was like, let's just take a nap. We need to just, this could last all night long. My other births had, my other labors had been around like 7 hours, 8 hours or so. And so I was like, this could be all night long. Let's just go ahead and get some rest. Everybody else is asleep. So we laid down at
12
midnight, and I hadn't felt anything before then, really. No pain with contractions or anything. So I really still didn't know if I was in labor, scared to call the midwife to come. And we laid down, and I had told her I'm going to take a nap. So all of a sudden, and I don't know if this was in a dream or what, but I hear this loud popping sound. And so I open my eyes, and then I feel something. I feel, I guess just liquid. I felt liquid coming out, and I was like, did my water break? Because in my past experiences, if my water broke, it was like when the baby was coming out. And so I woke up kind of scared. And so I wake him up, and I'm like, hurry up, hurry up. It felt like he was taking forever. And so I wanted him to get something up under me because we were just laying in our bed, and to figure out what was going on. So he helps me get everything off, and we see that it was the mucus plug. Well, in my past experiences with the mucus plug, it meant that, this was real labor now. Like, I'm in active labor. The pain is about to hit. And so that was my previous experience with, like, the mucus plug coming out. So when it happened this time, I felt a little bit of pain, and that was it. But I really had to talk myself into calming down, because as soon as that happened, we woke up to it. I hadn't called the midwife yet to come, but as soon as we noticed that, I was just like uncontrollably shaking, and I was like, call her. So we called the midwife, and I was like, he was like, hey. He said,
hey Christy, how are you?
Yeah, and I'm like, give me the phone. So I took the phone and said, you need to come right now. And I was just like shaking, I was freaking out.
Adrenaline.
And it was the adrenaline, but also in my mind I was thinking, oh, I'm scared. It all of a sudden hit me that this is actually happening. I am in labor, no doubt, and she's about to come out. It felt, it seemed like she could come out any moment, and I was scared because there's no one here. There was no midwife here. So she's like, okay, I'm coming. Well, we knew it would take her an hour and 45 minutes to 2 hours to get here. And so I walked over to the tub, and, I mentioned earlier, I had been praying that I was not going to have a bowel movement in this tub. Well, I step into the tub, and it all starts just coming out. And so my mom and my husband had to catch everything. And so my prayer, I guess, was technically answered because it never happened in the tub. So we never had to drain the tub. If we had to drain the tub for that reason, then we would have never had a warm tub, because we also woke up that hour later, because we were just asleep for an hour. When we woke up an hour later, the tub was warm. It was perfect. And so that was just like another little thing that went, so well that I couldn't have planned any better myself. So then I also got where I didn't have to worry about the bowel movement anymore. It was done. So it was like a relief of like not thinking about that anymore. And so sit down in the tub, and I was feeling very strong contractions already. So it had been just a matter of like 2 hours, or I had been in the tub for about an hour when the contractions started. Well, yeah, there was a midwife and then some assistants. So the assistants had gotten there like an hour later. But in the meantime, I'm sitting in the tub. So when I get into the tub, the water was warm, everything was great. And the contractions started coming really fast and really strong. And so I wasn't expecting that either. So I had written these note cards down to just renew my mind, renew my mind, renew my mind. So basically what happened was I had to fight the fear the entire time. I think the biggest problem in labor is fear. And when you start to freak out, then you start to feel pain, and all these other things can happen just from freaking out and tensing up and not allowing your body to just do what it's meant to do. So I knew from reading that book and, just trying to get discernment from God on what to do, I just kept praying different things. So I'm just going to go into, I'm trying not to make this too long, but I'm going to go into some of the mindset things that I had to go through and what I did to combat that fear and to allow God to take over instead of fear or, anyone else's mindset, things like that. So first of all, I wanted it to be very quiet. My older daughter, who was supposed to be there like during the birth and stuff, she was asleep. So we just let her sleep while I was in labor. And then my mom and my husband were here, and they were, very quiet. So having that quietness made a huge difference as well, so that I could really focus, because it took extreme focus, and it was just, fighting all that fear. So having those contractions, some things that I had to keep telling myself, because the contractions were extremely intense. So there's a difference between pain and a contraction. Contraction is your muscles, helping to push this baby out. It's supposed to do that. You're not supposed to have pain. You're supposed to have these very intense contractions. And so I kept reminding myself of that. Like, don't be afraid of this contraction, because it's so easy to start feeling those strong muscles contracting and to be like, oh, just to freak out, because it is a scary thing. Like, this isn't something you experience every day. It's a one-time thing you experience. And so it is definitely something that can be scary. And so what were you witnessing at that point when I'm just sitting there?
So most of the time, if you weren't reading your cards,
yeah,
just rocking, praying, you did some singing in the tub. Yeah, that's pretty much it. And anytime I did hear you rebuking pain sometimes. So I guess it might have been whenever you did start to feel something, mm-hmm. that you rebuked it. But yeah, that's pretty much it.
Yeah. So from his perspective, I guess, he's just sitting there like, what's happening? What's going to happen next? And just being quiet, because, our last experience, we were trying to do everything in our own strength. And so we had read some book about husband coached birthing and stuff, and so he was supposed to be like this coach who would basically talk to me the entire time and keep me calm, and we were just really trying to do it in our own strength. So this time we took a different approach, where it was more like, I didn't need him to say anything at all, and so he was just sitting here quietly just waiting for me to give him some instruction, I guess, if I needed it. And so some of the things that I was saying was, I surrender. I just had to keep saying that out loud, because your body is just so, your mind, as soon as you start having this really strong contraction that you're just not used to, and it doesn't have to be necessarily painful, it's just so strong that it's scary. It could be scary. And so I just kept saying, I surrender, I surrender, I surrender. And that's when he said I was singing, I was sometimes singing that. And I trust you, God, I trust you, God. And I would have to really talk myself into even just believing that in the moment, because I got to the point where I remember thinking, I'm afraid of that next contraction coming. And I don't want to be afraid. I have to get rid of this fear. So I kept telling myself, I don't partner with this fear that I'm feeling. I partner with God. And then I would say, I don't know why I'm closing my eyes when I say this, but the entire time I had my eyes closed. So there was no distractions. And it was just me, talking to God and talking to my body and just reminding myself of things. And so the note cards eventually were just pointless, because I just got to the point where I couldn't keep my eyes open at all. It had to just be me and God. So what I had written on and studied the entire time was still in my brain, And that was the most important thing. So that's why being prepared is so important, because even in the moment I couldn't focus on reading a note card because it was so intense.
But you could kind of remember what you had written down and focus on what you remembered.
Right.
Yeah.
So some of the things I wrote on the note card I was reading at the beginning, but it got so strong and the contractions were so close together, I couldn't open my eyes anymore. So and another thing I was saying was visualizing Jesus, you know, on the cross, taking all the pain and taking that from me in that moment. And I know that he doesn't want pain for us. He doesn't want sickness for us. He doesn't want these things for us. And so during that time of being so vulnerable and, you know, trying to let go of fear, I was just reminding myself, like, Jesus took this pain for me. I don't have to have this pain. And that's when sometimes it got so strong that like he said, I had to rebuke it. Like, I felt scared and I felt some pain. And so I was like, no, I'm not going to have this. It has to leave, and just rebuke it in Jesus' name and say, no, you're leaving. Like, I am not going to have this. And so that could be frustrating, you know, in the moment if that happens, but you have to be prepared for, if you have pain, this is what you do. And so that's what part of like reading that book and stuff helped me prepare for, was there might be a time that I do have pain, and if I do need to know what to do. And so do you remember what else I told you I was like reminding myself of? Was there anything else that I kept telling myself?
That you're getting closer, that you're about to see your baby, things like that.
So I would just remind myself whenever we get so intense and I would get scared, I would say, I'm literally about to hold my baby.
That also your body is doing what it was made to do.
Yeah, and just reminding, this is not scary. Like, God is literally made my body to do this. He's literally right here with us, and it's doing what it's supposed to do, so don't be afraid of that. And just reminding myself of that over and over, because that fear can come in so fast and so easy, and you have to really talk yourself out of it and just decide, I'm partnering with God, not the fear.
So there's a lot of self-control, because you had to conflict, you had to fight yourself.
Yeah, because he said my previous birth, I did a lot of complaining, like, it hurts so bad, you know, stuff like that. And so this one was different.
She didn't complain one time.
Yeah, so.
Aside from her wanting water.
Did I want some during labor?
Yeah, it was like twice, and that was it.
But
there's a lot of self-control, and there was a lot of reliance on God.
Yeah. Compared to relying on myself. I totally relied on myself the other births, and so this time it was fully surrendering, and that's why I said probably 10 million times during an hour. I was so how long was I in the tub?
So you were in the tub for probably an hour and
30 minutes, maybe.
Well, so
okay,
I say you got in probably around 1:15.
Yeah, we took a nap at midnight, woke up at 1 a.m., called the midwife. That's when my mucus plug. In the pool by 1:15 a.m.
And the first
baby came out.
Well, we'll get to that in a minute.
Okay.
The first apprentice showed up around 2:15, maybe?
Yeah, 2:15 a.m.
So about an hour after we called.
Yeah.
And so you don't even remember that apprentice coming in the door.
Yeah.
So she was so focused on what she was working on that apprentice showed up, and I told her whenever she got in here, hey, sit down, be quiet, relax. That's what she wants. So she didn't make a sound. She just said, hey, the midwife will be here in about 20 minutes. And then she came and sat down. Sierra don't even remember that happening.
Yeah, I didn't know. I was so focused so this was around 2:15.
Yeah.
And the contractions were back to back to back to back. Like, I started to get a little afraid because I'm like, why? I knew enough to know from having other babies that if the contractions are that close and that strong, the baby's probably about to come.
Yep.
But I had also had to push an hour the last time.
Yep.
So I was thinking, okay, I'm about to have to start pushing, and I'm scared of pushing because it could take forever. I didn't know if it was going to be painful, even though I was believing for pain-free. So I start to feel fear, and this was around that 2:15 time when they're showing up, and the contractions are so strong that I'm like, it's about to be push time. I just know that it's going to be. And I was telling God, please, I'm scared. Like, I am scared to get up and start pushing. The pushing process has been so terrible. I'm scared. Can you please do it for me? So another thing I had read in that book was where, I forget the medical term, but where your body just literally basically pushes the baby out for you. And I was asking God, please, God, give me that experience. Please, I can't do this. I'm scared. And I even started to have the thought, which was probably definitely the enemy putting this thought in my mind, you should have went to the hospital. You should have just got an epidural. And that was coming in my mind. And I was like, for a minute I got scared, and I thought, you know what? No, God's going to give me an epidural. You're like, I'm not going to feel anything.
God's going to give me... Can you say that again?
It's like, God's giving me an epidural right now. Like, I don't need this epidural because I'm having no pain with this. So anyways, I was just kind of fighting back on that thought and pushing that, like, the enemy away of, like, he's trying to get to me right now at my most vulnerable time, because at that point that was the most scared I had felt, because I just had a traumatic experience with pushing in the past every time. And so
you go ahead and then I'll...
Okay, so asking God to make it to where I didn't even have to do anything. I was like, basically, I just want to sit here. I don't even want to do anything. Can you please help me? Give me the experience that this other person has had where they didn't really even have to push. So yeah. This part he knows about because he experienced. He actually got to see this part.
Okay, so she is sitting there quietly. She's rocking back and forth. The apprentice has maybe been there for 10 minutes, 12 minutes or so.
So let me tell you real quick what I was actually feeling. So he's witnessing me just rocking back and forth, not saying a word. I am witnessing this is an intense contraction. Yeah. It's not going away. What's happening to me? Like, I thought I was about to pass out. It was so intense that so that's why I was not making a sound, because I was sitting here in shock thinking, what's happening, what's happening, what's happening.
And she's pretty much quiet for a long time before this, but the apprentice is sitting down, I'm sitting down, her mom's sitting down. No one is really doing anything at this point. We're just all relaxing, just waiting for her to give us instructions. And then she literally just sits up on her knees and says, someone catch the baby. Or someone catch her is what she says. She says, someone catch her. And we're all like, what? And when we just jump into action, the apprentice is putting her gloves on. I'm standing up. Her mom's standing up. And she gets up on her knees. And what'd you say? You pushed one time? Twice? I think it was twice.
Exactly, because it was just so intense in the moment. Like, we didn't even get a chance to record.
Yeah, it was that fast. Yeah. She's like, someone catch her. We all jump into motion, and no one hits the record button on the phone.
Yeah.
And she does her pushes, and as she's pushing,
here's what it was more like than a push. So I was on my knees, and all of a sudden I felt her between my legs. Like, I didn't push at that point.
Well, you felt the never-ending contraction, and she was between your legs.
Yeah, I felt that contraction, but I wasn't at that point pushing. So all of a sudden, I felt a head between my legs. No pain. And I mean no pain. I could not even tell she was there. It was like it was completely numb. Like, he gave me the epidural, and except I could move around. You can't do that with an epidural. So, she's distracted me now.
So that's
no
what's
pushes.
going on with her.
That's what I was trying to get
So
to.
no pushes.
She was between my legs.
And as she says that, we're all working in motion, and I hear the door open, and the second apprentice comes in.
Oh, it's okay.
As Eden is coming out, the second apprentice is coming in. So we're all in motion over here, and before we even know it, Eden is out. And so me and Sierra's mom were kind of thinking that it was 2 pushes.
So I did.
We call them pushes. Sierra doesn't even say that she really pushed anything.
I did end up pushing a little bit when I realized she was between my legs. I was like, oh, it's time to push. So I just started pushing, and then she came right out.
Right out, and the apprentice caught her, and literally at that moment is whenever we start the recording. Mimo, Sierra's mom, has started the recording. The 2 apprentices were there, and the midwife still isn't there. So it was that fast. Someone catch her, and maybe a minute later she was out.
Yeah. So.
Yeah.
So, you want to try to? maybe walk around with her.
Sure.
And I'll try to finish the video here.
Try to finish.
It's been forever.
We'll finish.
Okay, so anyways.
Oh, baby. It's okay.
She came out. So I'll post that video. I believe I'm gonna post it because it doesn't show anything really other than the midwife is holding the baby behind me, and I'm just everybody's in shock. So I'll probably end up posting that video, but this one is just us telling the story.
You might could leave it unlisted and put the link in the description.
Well,
if they want to.
So anyways, yeah, after that, she did end up having a short cord. So because of that, it was just a little bit difficult to like maneuver her around, but that also kind of adds to the story of just this being a miracle. I call this a straight up miracle, because if my placenta had been like any higher, then that short cord could have caused hemorrhaging and things like that. And so because of the placement of my placenta and everything that worked out, that God worked out so well, it ended up, the short cord didn't cause us problems other than just trying to get her moved around and stuff without pulling on that placenta. So yeah, it was just a completely different scenario than my other births, and I'm gonna try to make it quick talking about those. But my other births were just so traumatic. I had one child I was 19 or 20, and that was a completely medicated birth and in a hospital. Had Pitocin, was induced for no reason other than she might grow too big, so she was induced, and it was a terrible traumatic situation. I had like 3rd-degree tearing. It was horrible postpartum, trying to heal and all of that. And then my second birth was an all-natural birth, and I had the epidural the first time too. And my second birth was an all-natural birth to my child, who she ended up passing away at 3 years old. But I had her at a birthing center trying to have this beautiful natural birth, and it was very traumatic as well. It was super extremely painful, and it was a horrible experience, and I tore really badly and things like that. And then my third birth was a miscarriage, but I did end up having the baby at home, and it was just traumatic because of that. And then, so my fourth birth would have been my most previous birth, which was also a natural birth at the hospital, no medications. Terrible, horrible, traumatic, because of the doctors and nurses. Basically, they cannot understand natural birth as well as I think they should, and how to just leave you alone and let your body do what it needs to do. And I'm not trying to like say anything bad about them, because they did their best. They did what they thought was best for me and stuff. And I'm not saying, I'm not trying to say they're bad people or anything, but I would never do that again if I had the choice, because of how it's just not really understood that a woman can birth a child without all these medical interventions just because it's protocol. So anyway, that was a traumatic birth. I had a hard time pushing her out for an hour, and it was extremely painful. I had hemorrhaging. In every birth that I had hemorrhaging and almost had to get blood every time, and very low iron, lost a lot of blood, things like that. Bad tearing. So this time, completely different. And I can't see that other than just a miracle. And because of what God did, and because I totally trusted Him this time instead of me. Every other birth, I thought that it was me, that it was the doctors, that I relied on everything. And even though I called out to God during those times, and I'm sure He helped me in some ways, it was never a completely trust and believe in what He can do. And so this is getting too long. I don't even know if it's going to upload at this point. But I wanted to share this because this can happen for you. If you are, asking God for this pain-free, beautiful birth, it can happen for you. And that doesn't mean it's going to go perfectly the exact way you ask and all of these things, because if I had to go to the hospital, I knew that I was still, even though that I did not want to go to the hospital, I knew that I was still going to trust God and say, okay, God, this is what you have for me, and I'm going to trust that even here, I can have this natural birth or pain-free birth because of you. And so, or even just supernatural birth, because just because you have pain don't mean that everything's ruined and that you didn't get what you wanted at all and that it has to be terrible. So thank you for listening to this video. I'm going to share more about this probably in other videos, and I'm going to share what it was actually like right after the baby came out. So thank you for watching.